can tell a lot about a person, not by how they treat their equals, but by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them. It's a simple truth, a measure of character that money can't buy and status can't touch. For most of us, it's just a thought exercise. But for one billionaire and his young son, a simple dinner on a cold Tuesday night became a very real test. It was a night that started with fancy dishes and quiet whispers, but it would end with an act so unbelievably generous, it would change two families forever. This is a story about the huge gap between the window of a five-star restaurant and the cold pavement outside, and how one man's decision to cross that divide started a ripple effect of kindness. We hear about incredible wealth all the time, but what about incredible compassion? We see the news, we read the stories, and the gap between the rich and the poor can feel like a canyon too wide to cross. But what if it isn't? What if the bridge is just a single step, a single choice to see the person, not their circumstances? What happened on this evening wasn't just charity. It was an act of real empathy that started with a meal and grew into something no one could have ever predicted. Keep watching to see how a quiet moment and a simple question led to a series of events that prove true wealth isn't what you have, but what you're willing to give. The restaurant Aria wasn't just a restaurant. It was another world. A world of hushed tones, soft lighting, and the kind of perfection that makes everyone look like a work of art. In a plush corner booth sat James Harrison and his 12-year-old son, Leo. To the world, James was a titan who had built Harrison Healthcare, a global empire, from scratch. His name meant power and fortune. His suits were from London, his watches from Switzerland. But tonight, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a dad, trying to connect with his son over an expensive steak. Leo, a boy born into privilege, was quiet. He just poked at his food, his mind seemingly miles away. James had planned this dinner to be a lesson in appreciating the finer things, the world his son would one day inherit. The sommelier says the sparkling water from the Italian Alps is excellent, Leo, James said calmly. Apparently, the minerals are perfectly balanced. Leo nodded, but his eyes drifted past his father, past the waiters, and past the other diners. His gaze landed on the huge plate glass window that separated their warm, perfect world from the cold city outside. And out there was a scene that made perfectly balanced minerals feel completely pointless. Under the harsh glare of a street lamp stood a woman and a small boy. The woman, maybe in her 30s, had on a thin coat that was no match for the wind. She held the hand of her son, a boy of 6 or 7, whose own jacket was too small, his wrists sticking out in the cold. Their faces were pale and tired. Sarah whispered to her son, Daniel, trying to distract him, but the little boy was captivated by the window of Aria. He wasn't looking at the chandeliers or the people. He was staring at a bread basket on an empty table. His gaze was so intense, so full of raw hunger, you could almost touch it. Sarah gently tried to pull him along, her face a painful mix of shame and desperation. She knew they were a spectacle. She'd lost her receptionist job a few months ago, and medical bills for Daniel's chronic asthma had wiped out her savings. They were staying at a shelter, but a paperwork mistake meant they had no bed for the night. They had nowhere to go, and her last few dollars had gone to a new inhaler for Daniel that afternoon. Inside, Leo nudged his father. "Dad," he whispered. "Look!" James, annoyed at first, followed his son's gaze. He saw them. He saw the mother trying to shield her son from the wind. He saw the boy's small, hungry face. In that moment, the perfect world of Aria seemed to crack. The background music, the chatter, it all faded. All that was left was the massive, silent gap between his table and the two people on the pavement. He saw their struggle, and it stirred something inside him, an old memory from a life he'd long since buried under years of success. For a moment, James Harrison just watched. He was a man who solved problems with checkbooks and corporate directives. He delegated kindness to his company's foundation, but this wasn't an abstract problem. This was a mother and child, freezing and hungry, staring at the food he was about to take for granted. "They're hungry, Dad," Leo said. It wasn't a question, it was a fact. The simplicity of it cut through James's complicated world of assets and bottom lines. James's first thought was to do the easy thing, send the manager out with $100 bill. A simple, clean transaction. His conscience would be clear and he could get back to his steak. He flagged down the maitre d', a man who built his career on anticipating the needs of men like James. "Sir?" the maitre d' asked, appearing at his side instantly. James opened his mouth to give the order, send money, box up a meal. But then he stopped. He looked at Leo, who was still staring out the window, his face filled with concern. Then he looked back at the mother and son. Sending money felt like a dismissal. It was an act of power, not connection. It would feed them for a night, but it would just reinforce the glass window between their worlds. And then he did something that shocked the maitre d', his son, and even himself. "Please, go outside and invite that mother and son to join us for dinner." The maitre d' blinked, his composure slipping for just a second. "Invite them inside, sir?" "Yes, to this table. Tell them they are my personal guests." The maitre d' quickly recovered. "Of course, Mr. Harrison." Leo's head snapped around to look at his father, his eyes wide with shock, and then a flicker of admiration. He'd never seen his father do anything like this. This wasn't delegating. This was an invitation. Outside, Sarah was trying to get Daniel to walk towards a subway grate for a bit of warmth, when a man in a tuxedo appeared in front of them. She flinched, thinking he was there to tell them to leave. "Ma'am," the maitre d' said gently, "Mr. James Harrison would be honored if you and your son would join him for dinner, as his guests." Sarah just stared, confused and suspicious. This had to be a cruel joke. I don't have any money," she stammered, pulling Daniel closer. "That is understood, ma'am. You are to be his guests. Everything will be handled. Please, it's cold out here." Hesitantly, her heart pounding with fear and a tiny spark of hope, Sarah let him lead them to the gleaming doors of Aria. As they stepped inside, a wave of warmth and the rich smell of food hit them. The restaurant went quiet. Heads turned, people stared. For a second, Sarah felt a hot flush of shame, painfully aware of their worn clothes. But then she saw James Harrison, the billionaire from the news, standing up from his table, a welcoming look on his face. He wasn't looking at their clothes, he was looking right at them. The walk to James Harrison's table felt a mile long. Every eye in the room was on Sarah and Daniel, their shabby clothes a harsh reality in the restaurant's fantasy. But as they got closer, James gestured to the empty chairs. "Please, sit," he said, his voice holding no pity, only a calm sincerity. A waiter appeared instantly with menus. Daniel's eyes went wide as saucers as he looked at the fancy script. Sarah was completely overwhelmed. "Sir, I don't know what to say. This is too much," she whispered. "Let's start with saying yes to some warm food," he replied with a small smile. He turned to Daniel. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he mumbled, still shy. "Well, Daniel, I'm James, and this is Leo. Leo was just telling me the macaroni and cheese here is amazing. Is that something you might like?" Daniel's face lit up with pure joy, and he nodded eagerly. James ordered for him, and for Sarah, he suggested a warm chicken dish, something comforting, not complicated. As they waited for the food, the awkwardness started to fade. Leo, sensing Daniel's shyness, started talking about video games, and soon the two boys were chatting. For the first time in months, Sarah saw her son truly relax. James turned to Sarah. He didn't ask prying questions. Instead, he simply said, "Daniel is a wonderful boy. You're doing a great job."
Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. That simple bit of kindness from a stranger almost broke her. "I try," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's been hard." Slowly, encouraged by James' patient listening, Sarah's story came out. She told him about her husband, who died in an accident 2 years ago. She talked about losing her job and how Daniel's severe asthma and the endless medical bills had destroyed her savings. "I was a good employee," she said, a hint of defiance in her voice. "I was never late. I just ran out of luck. We lost the apartment last month. Tonight, the shelter was full. I didn't know where else to go." As she spoke, James was silent. The fancy restaurant faded away, and he was back in a cramped, cold apartment 40 years ago. He saw his own mother, her fingers raw from sewing, counting coins on the kitchen table, choosing between food and medicine for his own childhood illness. He remembered the shame of wearing hand-me-downs, the ache of hunger, and the exact same look of quiet desperation in his mother's eyes that he now saw in Sarah's. For decades, he had built walls around that memory, but listening to Sarah, he realized his wealth hadn't been a fortress, it had been a prison, cutting him off from the very things that made him who he was. He saw his mother in Sarah's fierce love for her son. He saw himself in Daniel's hunger. Breaking his silence, his voice was different, stripped of his CEO authority and full of raw empathy. "Watching you with your son, it reminded me of my own mother. We were in your shoes once. My father died when I was young, and my mother fought for us every single day. There were nights we didn't know where our next meal was coming from. I remember watching her, thinking she was the strongest person in the world, but also seeing the fears she tried so hard to hide." Leo stared at his father, stunned. He knew his dad came from nothing, but James never spoke about it. It was a locked door, and now he was handing the key to a complete stranger. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at a billionaire. She was looking at a man who understood. A tear finally escaped and rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from being truly seen. The meal had filled their stomachs, but this connection was feeding their souls. The main course was gone, and dessert arrived. The boys dug into a chocolate lava cake with pure delight. The mood was lighter, almost hopeful. But James was deep in thought. The meal solved the problem for tonight, but he knew it wasn't enough. Offering her cash now would feel like an insult to his mother's memory. It would just be a bandage. He had built his empire on finding real solutions, on fixing the root cause of a problem. He looked at Sarah watching her son laugh, and he knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to offer her a lifeline. He was going to offer her a new life. He waited for a quiet moment. "Sarah, I believe talent and dedication are the most valuable assets in the world. It's clear you have both. What happened to you wasn't your failure, it was a failure of the system." He paused. "I didn't invite you here just for a meal. Harrison Healthcare is always looking for dedicated, compassionate people. I have a role I think you'd be perfect for in our patient advocacy department. You'd be helping families navigate the healthcare system. Your personal experience gives you an understanding that no amount of training can teach." Sarah's fork clattered onto her plate. She just stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. A job offer? Here now? It felt impossible. "But I don't have a degree," she started. "You have a degree in life, Sarah. That's far more valuable for this. We'll provide all the training. The position comes with a competitive salary and full medical benefits for you and Daniel, effective immediately." He saw the shock in her eyes and continued, laying out his plan. "But a job is just one piece. You need a stable foundation. My company has a furnished 2-bedroom apartment not 10 minutes from our main office. It's clean, it's safe, and it's yours, rent-free for the first year while you get back on your feet." This was too much. Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A job, healthcare, a home? It was a dream. But James wasn't done. "And Daniel," he said, turning to the boy, "I want him to have every opportunity. I'm personally setting up an educational trust fund for him that will cover all of his schooling, right through college. And my foundation will take over his medical care. He'll see the top specialists. All costs, every appointment, every medication will be covered indefinitely. A good job, a secure home, a fully funded education, and lifetime medical care for his son. This wasn't just charity, it was a complete dismantling of every wall that had stood in her way." Finally, Sarah found her voice. It was a choked whisper. "Why? Why would you do all this for us? You don't even know us." James looked from Sarah to his own son, Leo, who was watching with a look of pure awe. He met Sarah's gaze, his eyes shining. "Because 40 years ago," he said softly, "a man gave my mother a small interest-free loan to start her own tailoring business after she lost her factory job. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. He told her to never pay him back, but to pay it forward one day. My mother worked herself to the bone and paid for my education with that business. Everything I have today started with that one act of kindness from a stranger. I'm not doing this for a stranger, Sarah. I'm finally paying my mother's debt." That was it. The dam holding back months of fear and grief finally broke. A sob escaped Sarah, but it was followed by tears of overwhelming, unbelievable joy. She buried her hands in her face as the full weight of the miracle washed over her. The constant anxiety about food, shelter, and her son's next breath was just gone. Daniel saw his mother crying and looked worried. "Mommy, are you sad?" Sarah looked up, her tear-streaked face breaking into the most brilliant smile Daniel had ever seen. She pulled him into a fierce hug. "No, baby, no, I'm not sad. I'm happy. We're going to be okay. We're finally going to be okay." Across the table, James Harrison felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The numbers in his bank account were just figures, but the look on Sarah's face, the security he had just given her child, that was real. That had meaning. He put a hand on Leo's shoulder. His son looked up at him with a new kind of respect. "True wealth, son," James said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's not what's in your portfolio. It's not the cars or the houses. That's all empty. True wealth is about what you do with it. It's about what you give. It's seeing someone else's struggle and choosing to build a bridge instead of a higher wall." A few months later, Sarah is in a bright, modern office, looking confident in professional clothes. She's on a headset, patiently talking a panicked mother through an insurance claim, her voice calm and empathetic. On her desk is a photo of her and Daniel laughing in front of their new apartment. In another scene, Daniel is running across a soccer field with his friends, his breathing easy and clear. He's healthy and happy. The final shot is of James and Leo not in a fancy restaurant, but volunteering at the very same shelter Sarah and Daniel couldn't get into. They're serving meals, side by side. James looks at his son, who smiles back, and their connection is stronger than it ever was over a 5-star meal. James had wanted to teach his son about wealth, but in the end, Sarah had reminded him what it truly meant. This story is a fictional, powerful reminder of the incredible impact one act of genuine compassion can have. It shows that real giving isn't just about writing a check. It's about investing in people. It's about offering dignity and opportunity, which can empower a family to break the cycle of poverty for good. The world isn't changed by huge, impersonal gestures, but by the simple human choice to see, to listen, and to connect. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Let us know in the comments below, what does kindness mean to you? Together, we can spread the message that a little compassion can make an unbelievable difference.